What it do, Dream Team? It's your boy D Neal back with another reaction video, guys. Here we are with how I view the U.S. after 12 years living abroad. Before we dive into this, y'all know I need y'all to smash that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, get a video a thumbs up so it gets suggested. You guys got a favorite video suggestion? You can subscribe to Patreon or drop it in the comment section. What we got?
I've been living abroad for 12 years now, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk about how my opinions and how my views have changed on the US after living abroad for so long. I saw a TikTok asking other Americans that live abroad the same question, how their views have changed since they've moved abroad and how they view the US now. And I thought it'd be interesting to add this into my 12 Years Abroad series, so let's jump right in with number 12, which is freedom. We are jumping right into it with freedom. If you know anything about the US, then you know what I'm talking about. The US prides itself on its freedoms. I don't know how many times I was told growing up that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I should be willing to die for that freedom. As you can imagine, I just kind of believed it because I didn't know better, and why would they lie about that? Well, I can tell you my opinion has definitely changed since traveling and living abroad. It turns out the US isn't even in the top 10 freest countries according to the Human Freedom Index. It is in the top 20, ranked at 15, but the way the media and government talk about freedom in the US makes it sound like all other countries are imprisoning their people and forcing them to work, which is kind of ironic because
I think it did show the criteria for how they base freedom on. I'm intrigued to see what the criteria for how they rank the freest countries are. I think that'd be very interesting to look at.
All other countries are imprisoning their people and forcing them to work, which is kind of ironic because the US actually ranks number 1 in incarcerated people. According to World Prison Brief, the United States leads the world in total number of people incarcerated, with more than 2 million prisoners nationwide. My views have definitely changed on the US being the freest country in the world. The US does have a lot of freedoms and has a strong judicial system, but so do other countries around the world. And the US is not ranked number 1. Moving on to number 11 on our list is something that many people argue about and often goes hand in hand with the idea of freedom, and that is gun ownership in the US. It is very interesting to talk with people who are not from the US and who haven't grown up with gun ownership being a common and real thing. Growing up in the US, it was normal to own guns, and many people I knew had guns. I remember my brother having a shotgun in his house, and I didn't think it was that strange or weird. But this isn't normal globally, and actually only 3 countries have constitutional rights to own a gun. While most countries allow gun ownership, they impose strict laws regulating which types of guns you can own and how they are stored. According to Insider, Americans own nearly half of all the civilian-owned guns in the world, and on a per capita basis, the US has far more guns than any other nation. With so many guns come mass shootings, which is a uniquely US thing. These attacks rarely occur in other countries, and the frequency and destruction caused by these attacks is heartbreaking. My views have changed.
Did you see school shootings compared to every other country, bro? It's sick to see and it's sick to watch, and then you hear all these people talking about more guns or don't take away. It's like, bro, like how many people gotta die before you realize we all don't need to have guns in our hands? Know what I'm saying? There should be a stricter process, stricter laws on guns than what we have now. That is crazy.
Frequency and destruction.
Look at that, 221 total school shootings since 2009. 6 countries equal to 1 or equal to 5. Ours equal to 288.
Caused by these attacks is heartbreaking. My views have changed a lot on gun ownership from this is normal to what is wrong with the US. Speaking of what is wrong with the US, next on our list at number 10, which ties back into the last 2 points, is national pride. Americans are extremely patriotic, and they believe that the US is the best country in the world, and you better not disagree with them because they might shoot you. Jokes aside, they are extremely patriotic because they've been lied to their whole lives. The US is a good country, but it is not the best country or worth chanting USA, USA, USA everywhere you go. Most Americans don't realize how bad they're getting screwed by the corporations and the government, and they truly believe that the US is number 1 in the world. It really depends on what you are ranking, but the US is usually in the middle or lower half of a top 20 list. From freedoms to quality of life to education, the US is ranked all over the place and rarely is number one, except for prisoners, guns, military spending, GDP, and a few other things that aren't very flattering. It isn't until you move abroad and remove yourself from the media-enforced lies that you start to realize the rest of the world isn't that bad, and some countries are even better than the US. In one way, many countries are better than the US is education. Number 9 on our list is education. According to results from the Program for International Student Assessment, the US ranks 39th in math, 23rd in reading, and 25th in science out of 73 surveyed countries. This is low for a country that claims to be number one. After living abroad for some time, it is clear that the US does not value public education, and universities are run like businesses. The cost of higher education is appalling compared to the rest of the world, and
bro, we are so far ahead of everybody else. We are so far. On this one, it's not as bad. Hong Kong is right there with us, but my Lord, like, come on. But I mean, I don't know why I'm acting surprised, but I know, like, the USA the country is ran like a business. It's basically profits come before everything, before lives. We are putting profits before any and everything. So I don't know why I'm surprised.
Like businesses. The cost of higher education is appalling compared to the rest of the world, and don't get me started on public schools. There are videos of teachers asking for school supplies, and Mr. Beast just did a video about helping students and teachers because the US government doesn't provide enough resources. The US government doesn't seem to care about education, and this means the general public also doesn't seem to care about education. Just search "Americans are idiots" and you will see how bad it is. Not to mention the dangers around teaching. After living abroad for a long time, it has become clear that education is not a high priority in the US, which is a shame because it is the best way for people to improve their lives and economic situation. Speaking of improving situations, we are about to hit number 8 on this list, but before I reveal that one, be sure to hit the like button because it really helps improve the situation of this video. Okay, let's jump back in with number 8, which is healthcare. I remember growing up that I never went to the doctor, and I never understood why. It was just my family didn't go to the doctor unless somebody was dying. I mean, literally, the one time I spent the night in the hospital, I was actually dying, and if I didn't have a surgery, I would have died. And I never really thought anything of it, it's just we didn't go to the doctor. Well, it turns out we didn't go because it costs a fortune just for a simple checkup. The US has state-of-the-art hospitals and medicine, but unless you are rich or have good insurance, good luck accessing it. The US spends more of its GDP on healthcare than any other high-income countries, yet ranks last in access to care, administrative efficiency, equality, and healthcare outcomes, according to the nonprofit Commonwealth Fund. I just typed into Google what countries have universal healthcare, and I realized it would be faster to look up which countries don't have universal healthcare. Some of the countries that don't have universal healthcare include Pakistan, Yemen, Syria, and of course, the United States. Basically, the entire world is covered in some form by a government-backed program, but the US is the only high-income country that doesn't have adequate and affordable coverage. Affordable being the key word in that last sentence. There are people that pay thousands of dollars on medication and treatment each month in the US, but if they lived in almost any other country, it would be free or affordable. My views have changed a lot on healthcare in the United States.
That's insane. You have to hear that and just like literally get upset from hearing that because that is ridiculous. Like these are people's lives. Like you saved them just to put them in crippling debt. I don't understand.
Would be free or affordable. My views have changed a lot on healthcare in the United States since leaving. And it's one of those situations that could be solved if people were willing to, and if the corporations didn't make so much profit off of keeping the system the way it is. And it's such a shame because people are, suffering because of this system. Exactly. And one of the ways it is profitable is by treating obesity-related health issues, which brings us to number 7 on our list, food. In the TikTok video I was watching about Americans and how their views had changed after living abroad, many of them were complaining about gaining weight or getting sick when they moved back to the United States because of the food. The food industry in the US is basically producing poison. The FDA allows food and packaging companies to use harmful chemicals when handling and processing food. These chemicals end up in the food, which can cause cancers and other health problems. Again, growing up in the US, eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast seemed like a normal thing to do.
I swear to
Little
God.
Debbie snacks and mac and cheese with hot dogs was a balanced diet, all washed down with Coca-Cola. It wasn't until I moved that I realized that some of the obesity problems in the US are actually food problems. It is easy to blame and say it is an individual's problem, which is part of the problem. But also a lot of the issues are related to the food industry and access to healthy foods. But changing the laws are much harder and not as profitable as changing people's attitude towards obesity.
No, me and my friend, like me and my bro were literally just talking about this. It's crazy because all the food that is bad for you is so much cheaper than the food that is good for you. Now, I used to buy just regular loaves of bread, and I could get the like cheap version and be like $1.10 tops. Now I buy like really low calorie. It's like 45 calories per slice. So low calorie bread, and it cost me $4 a loaf. So I jumped from $1 to $4 because I want the healthier bread. Like it's insane. It is ridiculous. But that's how it is with most healthier options that you choose. The less healthy options are your cheaper options. And the way you grow up, you're eating the Pop-Tarts for breakfast. You're tearing up the Little Debbie snacks. You're washing everything down with soda. And so by the time, when you're a kid, I feel like if you're an active kid, it doesn't affect you as much in the way that you look. Like, you don't look fat because I played so much different sports and I was very active. But once I went off to college and I was less active, I started seeing weight come on because of the food that I was eating. And so, it's crazy. But at that point, it's really hard to change your diet. And I'm not saying you can't. Like, I did learn how to change my diet and eat healthier. But it is very difficult when you're so used to eating all this sugar and eating all these fast foods and greasy foods and fattening foods. It's very difficult to change that up.
And not as profitable as changing people's attitude towards obesity. Now, if somebody says he, she, they are fat or unhealthy, they will get canceled for body shaming. So obviously my views have changed a lot in relationship to healthcare and food in the United States. Which brings us nicely to our next point on the list, woke culture. A quote that always makes me laugh is, if you're not a liberal when you're 25, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by the time you're 35, you have no brain. The cultural war that is raging right now in the US is insane, like literally insane. And it's all a distraction to keep people from enacting any real change in the government or society. If all sides are fighting with each other and themselves, the people in power and the corporations can pass legislation that hurts both sides and makes them more profit. The last thing they want is for all sides to unite under their common struggle and oust the people currently in power. The craziest thing is that when you are removed from it and you're living abroad, you can just see how crazy and insane it is and how damaging it is to society. While Americans are fighting about what a woman is or if the celebrity has used the correct pronoun, the rest of the world knows what a woman is and isn't wasting time on things that don't make their country or economy stronger. While American students are in their gender study classes wondering if they are a man, woman, or other, Chinese and Indian students are in their math and physics classes gaining real knowledge that might lead to the next breakthrough in science or technology. Learning about someone's gender isn't a real skill and won't create a breakthrough that could revolutionize any industry. It isn't even medical science. At best, we might learn about groupthink when people study this time period in the future. But in its current form, woke culture and the backlash to it is destroying society.
I swear to God, the people at the top are the only ones gaining from sending different races to go at each other, different classes to go at each other, learning about these things as gender and all of that stuff. Like, we're wasting our time, I feel like, arguing over stuff that shouldn't matter. That shouldn't matter. While the rest of the world is putting more effort into stuff that does.
Woke culture and the backlash to it is destroying society. Societies only exist when people are willing to share the same goal and work towards that goal together. Currently, both sides are unwilling to find common ground, and they're literally tearing each other apart. They're tearing the society apart. And the people in power absolutely love it. My views have
Loving
changed
it.
a lot on this
Getting
after traveling
paid.
to many countries because these types of debates aren't even considered in most places. Most people around the world are too concerned about feeding their families and improving their lives to even think about pronouns. But enough about all that, we've made it to number 5 on the list, and if you are still here, then you probably agree with me on many of these points. You probably also know that YouTube will not push this video to anyone, so be sure to like and share it with your friends to help others understand how the US looks from abroad. Next up on this list is another thing that is destroying the United States from the inside, and it's this consumerism, flex culture, celebrity worship. I'm sure there's a term for this, but I don't actually know what it is. It's basically the worship or the love of money. A Harris poll of 3,000 children between the age of 8 to 12 revealed that YouTuber was the first choice of 29% of them. Don't get me wrong, I would love to make a full-time income on YouTube, but I don't think that young people should be inspiring to be social media stars. If the US culture continues to inspire children to become celebrities and OnlyFans stars, the US will lose its competitive advantage in science and technology. When I was growing up, children wanted to be doctors, astronauts, teachers, and scientists. Sure, there were some kids that wanted to be WWE stars or actors, but they were usually outliers and not the norm. Nowadays, based on the polls, children want to be YouTube stars and they look up to Mr. Beast. I get the appeal of money and fame, but it is a slippery slope. If children look up to YouTubers, celebrities, and hustle culture promoters, and not doctors or scientists, I feel the future is doomed. The internet has created a lot of opportunities for new work and ways of making money, but very few content creators are curing cancer or creating the next tech revolution. If all the kids want to be YouTubers, who is going to build the future? Speaking of building the future, we all have to work, which brings us to our next point. I
do agree with that point, but I don't think it's bad for like kids wanting to be YouTubers. I don't see that as really a bad thing to me. I mean, because a lot of these kids aren't gonna be doctors, or aren't gonna be, you know what I'm saying, find things that cure the world, and so they want to do YouTube from a young age, and they see the outcomes of what YouTube can do for people. And I don't blame them. If I could go back in time, I would have started YouTube a lot earlier.
Sure. Speaking of building the future, we all have to work, which brings us to our next point. The U.S. mistreats employees. More than 120 countries around the world provide paid maternity leave and health benefits by law, including most industrialized nations except Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, according to reports from the International Labor Office. Just think about that for a second. Mothers who have just given birth are not given paid maternity leave by U.S. law. Because there are no laws on the books, it is up to employers to decide how much time and money new mothers are given. This is supposed to be a happy moment in a couple's life, but most parents miss out on important bonding because they have to go back to work. You'll be lucky to get 3 or 4 weeks off, and even luckier if it's paid. If you're commenting about the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 right now, I get it, there are some protections, but that really only covers unpaid leave. With the average family in debt and less than $6,000 in their bank accounts, it is hard to take 12 weeks unpaid leave. Maternity leave is just one example of how U.S. employees are getting hurt. Another good example is employment at will contracts, which only benefit the employer. Because many workplaces don't offer full-time contracts with salaries and benefits, employees are constantly anxious about their jobs. There is little job security with employment at will contracts, which pressures workers to work harder and longer because they are worried about
I don't think I've heard of an employment at will contract.
employment at will contracts, which pressures workers to work harder and longer because they are worried about losing their job. These types of contracts allow managers to create schedules that keep employees from reaching full-time hours, which means companies don't have to pay for insurance or other benefits that full-time employees should receive. Employers have even gone farther by creating gig work and refusing to classify workers as employees, reducing their tax, insurance, and benefit obligations. They create campaigns claiming that it is good for employees and that it provides more flexibility, but in reality, it only burdens workers. People don't want to feel insecure about their livelihoods. Reports and studies show that people are more productive and happier when they feel secure in their workplace. Employment isn't always fair and balanced in the United States, and 2 things really jump out to me when talking about this. First, Americans have been trained to hate unions. It is surprising just how much effort has gone into breaking or stopping unions. This is a video in itself, but history has shown that workers have benefited the most when strong labor unions force business owners to increase wages and provide more benefits. But because this history is not taught in schools, call back to my previous point, workers believe unions cost them money and don't help their employment situation. The second thing I've noticed is that people define themselves by their work. They are what
Facts.
they do. In other countries,
Facts.
people are more concerned about their family relations or hobbies, but in the US, your job is who you are and everything else is secondary. Because success is defined by money and not happiness or relationships, people in the US are obsessed with their careers. This creates a culture of unfulfilled and unhappy people because they care so much about their work, but their employer doesn't care about them. I'm not saying it's perfect around the world, but there does seem to be a hyper focus on productivity and self-worth through work within the United States, which should be changed to create a better working environment for U.S. workers. We are about to make it into the top 3 ways my views have changed on the U.S., but
America, we gotta get it together, y'all. Like this, we gotta get it together. We need to fix all of these. And I know Rome wasn't built in a day. We can't fix them all overnight. But I feel like we need to start making strides towards these things because this is crazy. For us to call ourselves the greatest country in the world and then have so much of these issues.
we are about to make it into the top 3 ways my views have changed on the US, but before we make it to number 1, be sure to hit the like button because I'm afraid that YouTube will suppress this video. YouTube doesn't always push videos that tell the truth, so hit that like button or share it with a friend because they might also like the video. Moving on to number 3, transportation. This one might seem strange at first, but let me explain. If you live in the United States and you want to get around, you have to own a car. Period. Most cities do not have adequate public transportation or even good bike lanes. The US is car dominant, and without a car, you will struggle to do basic tasks. Things have changed in the last 12 years with ride-sharing apps and food delivery apps, but it is still really difficult to get around in the United States if you don't own a car. Growing up in the US, that seemed normal because it is normal for the US, but outside of the US, many countries have decent public transportation. Countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark all have designed cities to incorporate biking, and many people bike to work. Many countries in Asia, like Japan, Korea, and China, have subways and high-speed trains connecting cities and areas, which makes it convenient to get around. With all the money the US government spends on the military and subsidies, it could have redesigned many of the cities to include bike lanes and subway systems. When people feel safe on the roads and the cities encourage biking, people will bike. There are enough examples of cities redesigning their downtown areas and encouraging biking to support the investment, but despite these examples, nothing seems to change. Bus routes, subways, trains, and bike lanes are not developed despite evidence that it improves people's lives and commutes. If the US took a little bit of their military spending and diverted it back into infrastructure, they could create more jobs in better cities. My opinions on public transportation have changed a lot after living and traveling in cities that have good public transportation. Speaking of government spending, number 2 on our list is...
Yeah, I don't see that happening, so where they take money away from military funding and put it in the cities and stuff, unfortunately. Like, no, I'm saying, I can't see that happening. Yeah, to in America, you got to have a car, or you just can't do anything. You can do the ride-sharing apps, but that's going to start costing you too much after a while. But yeah, you gotta have
good public transportation. Speaking of government spending, number 2 on our list is the US government, and there are 2 things I want to talk about. Let's first talk about the military. The US doesn't need to police the world. By taking on this role, it has allowed other nations to expect and rely on US military support, but that has weakened both the US and reliant nations. It has weakened reliant nations because they spend less money on their own militaries, and it has weakened the US because the US spends too much money on the US military. If the US spent 10 or 20% less on the military each year and diverted it back into building the US, it would be a stronger nation in terms of domestic strength. The US would have better healthcare, schools, infrastructure, and public services. But that will never happen because the US government is fractured and dysfunctional, which brings us to the second point that I want to address.
I just feel like America believes that, if you are the most powerful, then you control it. Like you're in control, in which in a way, I mean, it's understandable. Like if you don't get your way, then you can get it by force, basically. And I think that's what America's military is capable of doing. If there was a problem, then they would take what they wanted by force.
Is fractured and dysfunctional, which brings us to the second point that I want to address. The two parties are not working to benefit the people, and because of this, people are voting more and more extreme. The US government allows lobbies to push specific agendas that don't benefit the people, and because of this, the people vote for anyone that promises change. Right or left, it doesn't matter because both sides are becoming more and more unhinged. The two sides are no longer working together, and the lobbies are funding special projects that only benefit the corporations. The politicians are corrupt and always have been, but now it seems like there is less cooperation between the two sides, and this is all spurred on by the mainstream media, which brings us to our final point. But before I talk about the mainstream media, be sure to hit that like button because YouTube is part of the problem and they will probably suppress this video. Okay, let's talk about the US media. It's all fake news. I don't support Trump or his policies, but I totally understand him and why people voted for him. He coined the term fake news, but he's not wrong. You can't even really call it news anymore, and it's bad on both sides. In the past, we used to have tabloids in the supermarkets at the checkouts, and they would always have the most ridiculous headlines like, "Woman gives birth to alien and claims the father is Joe Biden. We have the exclusive interview. You won't believe what she said." We all knew it was fake, but it was kind of fun to read. Nowadays, this is every news headline. Because the news is a business and needs to make money, they will print the most outrageous headlines to get more views and clicks. Mix the mainstream media in with social media and actual fake news by your favorite YouTuber, and you create a nation of misinformed people. If you can't distinguish between lies and truth, then you will forever be lost. And I feel many people in the United States right now are lost. They are fighting over lies, and because they want something to be true, they are willing to believe lies. This goes for both sides. Doesn't matter which opinion you hold about a topic, someone is creating content to push you farther down the rabbit hole. As long as there's money to be made off of content, then Fox and CNN and YouTube and TikTok and Facebook